just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This was actually recorded before the announcement of the new calendar, so some of the stuff is just rumours, even though they have been confirmed now. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Supercars Exchange podcast. As always, I'm joined by Shane. How you going, Shane?
Mate, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm going pretty good. We had a pretty dominant weekend by McLaughlin at the Bend, winning both the races and dominating basically every session besides from a couple where Mostert got up there. But as we were kind of expecting, and as we have been expecting most of this year, it was a pretty dominating run by McLaughlin again.
Yeah, you're right. It was. It seemed to be all one-sided, but he didn't quite have it his own way right through the races. We've seen that he had to sit in behind. He got the jump on Mostert early in the race, like on the run down to turn one, and in the first race after Mostert got a very surprise pole. I didn't see that one coming. Like when you consider, McLaughlin at times had been, he had a large gap back to second in practice sessions. For Mostert to pull out the lap that he did in that first qualifying session was a real big surprise. And then, as we'll get to in the second race, he had a tougher start to the race, dropped a couple of positions, and then but he had to race well to get back to those. But all in all, it was just one man to beat this weekend.
It was interesting to see when McLaughlin, he came into the pit lane and he got completely undressed. I think it was like with 5 or 6 minutes to go. Still, he was undressed and standing in the garage, and then it looked a bit silly when Mostert came across the line and got him. But he's done it for the previous few qualifying sessions because it's like, no one's gonna get that. And then Mostert got it right towards the death, and you saw on his face he was pretty shocked as well. He wasn't expecting Mostert to get up there like that.
Yeah, he definitely. I don't think they'll be doing that too much for the rest of the year. Getting one lap going, yep, that's it, my job's done, pit, and then they'll make sure they're out there to wrestle it back if they need to. But I think you could see them, like, it was definitely surprised and he was quite shocked, but you could see him mouth the words like "good lap." He's I think he was genuinely surprised, but also credit where it was due that Mostert pulled out a really incredible lap, and but throughout the race, McLaughlin, he didn't pull away from him. And there's plenty of argument there to say that if Mostert hadn't had that slightly longer pit stop in the race, then he would have leapfrogged him, and it would have been up to McLaughlin then to pass him back on the track, which you could see, despite a 1 kilometre long straight, slipstreams were not something that was coming, which you almost didn't see any overtaking into turn one. That probably goes to show that there is too much aero on the car. Like if there was less, you'll definitely be more slipstreaming.
Too much disturbance.
Yeah, that's it. So that's one of the things that they've been saying is that they can get rid of a lot of that aero. Even 30 or 40% of it would be enough that a slipstream would be more effective, because if you can't get into a tow on a 1 kilometre straight, then something's wrong.
Just talking on aero briefly and aero adjustments. The Nissans, what slipped under the radar a little bit was their massive rear wing now, and their end plates as well have been completely adjusted. It just looks like a completely different wing now. Obviously to keep up now with the Mustangs and the Commodores. So it looks very strange, like a lot weirder than than the Holdens and the Fords. So certainly not an appealing rear end anyway.
Yeah, well, they got the different shape. It doesn't have that sort of shopping trolley handle style spoiler. It probably actually looks a little bit like what the FG Falcon used to have. But it's also got that tiny little lip that just sits on the end of the bonnet, designed to try and push air up and underneath the rear wing, and just allow the downforce to work a little bit better there. Later on, Rick Kelly was saying that he didn't feel like it. He wasn't too sure if it worked or not. At a fairly aero-dependent circuit like the Bend is, if you haven't figured it out there, then it's probably hasn't really worked as well as they would have liked, I guess. But they had a couple of good results over the weekend, so I guess you can't say it was a total waste for them.
Well, Heimgartner was up in 5th in the first race, and that was their best performance for the weekend. So they're certainly not lagging behind massively, if anything. But going to the first race, Thomas Randall had a pretty rude introduction to supercars at the first corner with his tangle with his fellow rookie in the form of Macaulay Jones. And then we had the massive accident, which involved was Davison, Silvestro, and I think it was Hazelwood as well, all just running into each other because Kelly ended up just tapping the inside of whoever was on the inside of Simona. So it was like a three-way car, and he ended up destroying his own team, basically, which was pretty unfortunate.
And so it was Kelly ended up getting a drive-through, but he was the only one that had survived any damage to the car. He just drove off into the distance and left a trail of destruction behind him.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there was another race where something similar to that happened, where he just tapped someone and their race was ruined.
Maybe.
I think I've seen that story before. I think I'm definitely sure I've seen that movie, but but it was. It was more of a race incident. I was actually, it probably rightfully got the penalty for it, but I think the damage was, certainly hurt the other guys more because Davidson, I don't think he ended up finishing the race. He had a lot of dramas.
Yeah.
Silvestro didn't finish the race.
Hazelwood didn't finish either.
Yeah, so that's right. So he's taken 3 drivers out of the race,
Yeah.
and he's gone on. So even a penalty, like even finishing dead last, or I don't know where he finished in that first race, but they could have put him dead last, but at least he still finished compared to the other 3 that didn't because of it.
Yeah, I was very impressed with Hazelwood's ability to be able to drive it back to the pit lane when his bonnet was completely up, just looking through that tiny gap at the bottom. Very good handling, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's it. You'd I wonder if you could even see down far enough to see out the front of that, the little gap from below the bonnet and the top of the windscreen, top of the dash there, or if you're just sort of looking out the side and trying to keep the edge of the track in your vision there, or probably a little bit of both. And the team's probably telling him, you should have 50 meters to go, then turn left. Just use the track markers there, or the track map. But it's but he got it back home. It saves a walk anyway.
Yeah. Results of the first race, McLaughlin obviously got that win, and Mostert, unfortunately losing it from the pole, still put up a pretty good battle to McLaughlin, as we were saying.
He had to fall back late though, because they had their fuel
issue.
Pop up. So even if he actually did get it, I wonder if McLaughlin putting enough pressure on him might have caused that light to come on anyway, and they might have just had to drop back to second at the end of the race, regardless of what had happened, which probably would have been more heartbreaking for Mostert than if you had the win in your sight, and then with a lap or so to go, suddenly all right, I've got to pull back here.
Yeah,
that would have been pretty ordinary.
Yeah, it's interesting that they were cutting it so fine as well. It must have been like literally the difference of the wind speed or something that made the difference for the fuel in the end. Either that or they just didn't get enough fuel in the pit stops, even though they were stopped there for longer. They're cutting it obviously very, very fine there for the fuel. Moving on to some other pretty good performances. Nick Percat, as I'll touch on later, had a pretty good weekend. He came up 11 positions up into 8th, which is pretty good considering the performances in the last couple of rounds. So he's kind of on the way back again. Randall had a decent recovery from being dead last at the first corner up to 17th. Even though he went down 3 positions from his original position, it was still cutting through the field basically. But yeah, there was some pretty good performances in that first little sprint race.
Winterbottom and Di Pasquale finishing 4th and 3rd respectively, which I thought was Di Pasquale actually had the measure of Reynolds the entire weekend. Yeah, which was beat him home in both those races, I think. So beat him home both those races, and out-qualified him for the in both races. I think for the first time. I think it might only be the second time this year that's happened. So he's definitely starting to improve there, and it was a good bounce back by Winterbottom too, who had quite a few tough rounds now. It's been quite a while since we've seen him up the pointy end.
Also, just touching on briefly, Triple Eight, even though some people harped up on about them all weekend. They had a terrible beginning to the weekend in the practice sessions. It really was looking quite devastating for them in a championship perspective. But then they did manage to bounce back in the first race and then came back even stronger in the second race. So it's interesting that they were actually able to switch it around, because previously when we've seen Triple Eight struggling on a weekend, it would just last throughout the entire weekend. So it's good to see that they're starting to adapt, I guess, to coming to a racetrack and not being quick, and they're actually starting to be able to turn it around. It's bodes well for maybe they'll have more of a bounce back next season.
Yeah, you're right. I was just surprised watching the practice sessions at how much time they spent off the circuit, and there were a lot of Holden teams. The WAU cars also spent a lot of time off the circuit. Like there was that practice, the final practice on the Sunday race where Pye went off, and he was so far off the circuit, he's gone up the embankment and he's had to come back down. It's like I've just never seen a car go that far off the circuit. Like it probably, the fact that you just got that sort of continuous right-hand corner and they seem to be just sort of sliding wide, they just understeer wide, and because the track's disappearing further off to the right and you're just going straight, you end up so far off the circuit by the end of it.
Yeah.
But there was so many Holden teams struggling. I didn't think it was going to be that bad, considering that this was a track that Red Bull in particular, but there was it was very much a Holden circuit last year, and it's switched around this year, as we did expect that to be kind of the case, but we thought that maybe some of the top Holden teams might be making it quite even, but it just didn't seem to be doing that. And Triple Eight were the biggest surprise of all that, because they had appeared to be making some inroads over the past couple of rounds, but I don't know if you can remember in the last couple of podcasts, I said like Townsville being a track that they've dominated at for so long, and then Queensland Raceway being their home circuit. That I thought they've definitely made improvement, but until we start to see them at just one or two more circuits, you won't know for sure. And then we got to Talon Bend, and they seem to have taken a couple of steps backwards to perhaps even where they were prior to Darwin even.
Yeah, it's interesting because they weren't even the top Holden team this weekend. They were behind Brad Jones Racing most of the time and behind Penrite Racing as well. So they just weren't even there challenging the top for the Holden teams even. So it's in the second race they obviously improved a little bit more. Van Gisbergen especially, very poor qualifying, and he came up the field pretty well. But yeah, it's looking like a very inconsistent season for Red Bull, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, we've seen in Whincup for that qualifying for race 22 on the Sunday, he actually blocked off the brake ducts entirely in order to just try and generate more front downforce, and he was able to stitch together a pretty good lap, and he qualified quite well. But it's all in all, like you sort of had that feeling that he was still going to drop back a couple of spots throughout the course of the race. And then he ended up having that big off late in the race on Sunday as well, and luckily for him it only cost him one position as Percat snuck through. But they were having a lot of dramas. Like we even seen that in that practice session for the Sunday race that Van Gisbergen was just cheering that he completed a lap. And actually, and it wasn't even an overly fast lap. It certainly wasn't spectacular. He was just happy that it stayed on the black stuff for the entire lap, that's a real surprise if they're cheering that sort of stuff.
That's like Formula One backmark kind of stuff.
Yeah, really. That's it. You're just relieved that you can qualify and be a part of the race.
Moving on to the Sunday race, it was a Mustang domination, really, with McLaughlin, Davison, and then Mostert. Davison, really good performance on the Sunday. Obviously got taken out on the Saturday, so we really can't have a great assessment of how his pace was throughout the weekend. In accordance with races anyway. So it was really good performance. It makes you wonder whether he would be right up the pointy end challenging if he wasn't to be taken out on that Saturday race.
Yeah, it was. In fact, I reckon he was probably almost the fastest driver in that Sunday race. I reckon Tickford had made a huge gain on DJR throughout the
Mm.
course of the weekend. Like you could argue that they probably almost had the faster car at certain times of the race. And but Davidson he drove the wheels off that thing and had the lead for a chunk of the race. They used a bit of strategy for the first part of qualifying, but again they only lost that race because they had that airbox drama, they had the fire
Yeah.
in the box, and it cost them a bit of time in their second pit stop, and they came out behind, and that sort of sealed the victory for McLaughlin because you had that couple of seconds advantage, and he was able to just hold it. So I reckon all in all, the Tickford, I don't think you could split them between time because you could see that Mostert was equally as fast in race one, and Davidson appeared to have a good enough pace in race two. Admittedly, at the start of the race when we seen McLaughlin, he dropped back to third.
Yeah.
That pass he put on Whincup to get back up to second was probably one of the braver moves because it could have easily gone wrong, and just that slight tap and he would have been off in the weeds, and that would have ended his day. He certainly would have been a lot further back in the pack.
It was. It's interesting that it was such a close race in strategy wise, considering we didn't even have a safety car, and it was like right towards the end of the race. It was Davison coming out, and it was still really close with McLaughlin. We haven't seen a race that close in quite a while this year. So it's good to see that Tickford are really starting to challenge the likes of Shell V-Power Racing, and it even shows in the championship results with Mostert now jumping Coulthard in the overall championship. Not by much, but now it's not a Shell V-Power 1-2, it's now McLaughlin then Mostert. So obviously Coulthard had a bit of a shocker. Unfortunately,
that's two in a row for him too. So that's a big drop in form for him.
It's interesting because that comes just after he's been re-signed with Shell V-Power, because he was on the up again as they announced that they were re-signing him, and now he's just dropped back down again. So he's it's reminiscent of last season. I think we saw at the beginning of the season, obviously he was matching McLaughlin most of the time, if not challenging for the lead, and now he's just not there anymore.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the problems that he's talking about do actually sound very similar to what he had last year. So you're absolutely right there, and it's and he needs to step it up. Like there's no two ways about that. Like we've seen Queensland Raceway didn't have the best weekend. Every driver's going to have it, so you can't fault him too much for that. But when you see it, go on to another race weekend, and even Townsville, he wasn't having the best weekend really, like compared to other weekends throughout the season. So it has been an issue. Even Darwin, again, going back that far, it probably wasn't as good as what we've seen from him in the earlier stages of the season. So it's been a slow decline down, and it's almost like it. I don't partly because I think some of the other teams have made up some of that gap. Like certainly Tickford on the weekend, and I think they closed the gap a long way. We've seen Red Bull start to make a few inroads as well. We've seen Penrite guys have started to get a bit more speed out of their car. So it's like just if they can find that 2 or 3 tenths, and if the fact that Coulthard hasn't really found that same amount of time, he's dropped back behind them, and it's probably almost fair to say he's almost the slowest of the Mustang runners over the past couple of rounds.
Yeah, he's his performance certainly hasn't been up to scratch. But moving on to someone that performance was pretty decent and not really what we expected, Thomas Randall. He obviously the wild card for this weekend in a Mustang, so pretty quick car. He performed pretty well, as we touched on earlier in the first race. He cut through from the back, and then in the second race he made up a few positions from not a great qualifying session, but he made up quite a few positions in that one, and just to be able to hold your own against some of the more experienced drivers is pretty impressive, to say the least.
Yeah, well, that's it. For the first time out, you don't expect too much, and we sort of thought that if you could qualify somewhere around that 20th mark, maybe the bottom end of the teens, that would be a fair result in qualifying. And if he could finish around that 15th mark, that would be a fair result too. And that's kind of where he was aiming at across both of those races. If there wasn't any incidents like in that first race, he probably would have had a pretty decent result. We even seen him in the first practice session. He was fourth, I think, which is very impressive, and not a long way behind Scott McLaughlin, who topped the session. It is only practice, as we keep saying, but to stitch together a lap when you hadn't had any real seat time in a Mustang prior to that, then that's a pretty fair effort.
I think because the second race was a bit longer, and obviously is in the Super 2, so they're not really used to such a long race, 200 kilometers by yourself. I think exhaustion might have also played a part in it. It's because obviously he was charging forward in the first race after that accident, probably due more to anger than anything. But then in the second race, after he made those positions forward, it kind of settled a little bit for him. He wasn't too far off the WAU cars, but yeah, you got to also think about how much was, not taking anything away from Randall, obviously, but how much was the Mustang and how much was his performance? Like, would his performance have been worse if he was in a wildcard for Commodore or something? Yeah,
I think it's a little bit of both. Obviously we've seen how good the Mustangs have been over the course of the weekend. Like, there were some of the practice sessions where they filled the first, I think in the second practice session, or it might have even been the Saturday morning practice session. If that was qualifying, Ford would have filled like the first 3 rows of the grid. So it was pretty obvious that they had their cars hooked up. But then, you see that, like I said, how many dramas that some of the Commodore teams were having throughout the course of the weekend, was just trying to get their car to grip and just turn in. Just simple things like turning into a corner, which is quite surprising because they didn't have those dramas last year at that same circuit. So something's changed over the course of the year. Because you didn't see, like, obviously last year you did see a few cars falling off the circuit, but it was a brand new circuit, so you could understand that drivers pushing, and it was still quite dirty. The track hadn't fully cured in like it certainly would be now. So
yeah,
it was. You could excuse them for that last year, but then this year it was just drivers pushing, just going off the circuit because the car couldn't, live up to what the drivers were hoping it would, and that was it. So I think certainly the Mustang had certainly a better aero package at the moment. That's why Randall would have had a much happier time of it, but you can't deny that his skill played a lot of that too. Like, we've seen other wildcards come in and they qualify, second last and finish third last. So I think if you're finishing in the mid pack, I think you've done pretty good for yourself.
And he's got his Enduro drive for this year. It's just passed my mind who he is driving with. Just give me a second.
Holdsworth.
Oh yeah, it isn't a Mustang. Yeah, it's with the Holdsworth. So that'll be pretty good to see.
I think it was. It was a bit of a like the worst kept secret had been like hotly tipped for a couple of weeks now. Certainly, at least sort of since Townsville's, when you first started to see the rumours that he'd be getting an Enduro drive with one of the Tickford guys, and seeing as how Holdsworth, I think, is the only one that doesn't have a co-driver yet, then it would be him. I'll be looking forward to seeing that, because Holdsworth, he's obviously got a lot of experience around Bathurst now. He's been around for quite a few years. Randall, the young hotshot rookie, I think that'll be an exciting lineup. So I'll be gives you something else to look forward to for Bathurst.
It reminds me a little bit of the Tander Percat lineup, because obviously at that point Tander had a lot of experience around Bathurst, and then when he paired up with Percat, they won it. So it'll be interesting to see. I think they'll be definitely a team to watch, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. I think, and given how good the Mustang has been this year, I don't think you could discount any of the Mustangs from a potential Bathurst victory.
So moving on to the top 3 from the weekend. I'll go for my third first. So in third position, I've got Percat, just because he cut through the field in the first race. He made up quite a few positions, made up 11 positions, so pretty decent first race. Only ended up 8th, so not the best, but obviously performed very well to cut through that many people. And then had a pretty good qualifying on the Sunday and made up a few positions and put enough pressure on Whincup to make him go off. Not really, but he can claim that anyway.
Well, it was the fastest Commodore in the end. So,
yeah. So he was
let home the Commodores. That's a good result. If you're looking at it that way at a track where the Fords have been so good all weekend.
My second place has to go to Mostert. He obviously he wasn't able to challenge McLaughlin at the end of the first race, but he had a pretty good run all weekend, very consistent, second and a third, pipped by Davison obviously in qualifying, and then Davidson stayed away in front of him on the Sunday. But yeah, pretty good performance from Mostert as well. And then for my first place, I've gone, obviously, McLaughlin, because he's dominated the whole weekend, besides from that qualifying session where Mostert got him. So yeah, another awesome weekend by the number 17.
Yeah, well, I was going slightly different. Again, it was really tough because there were a few drivers that genuinely deserved a point or two. Like you got Di Pasquale, who got a podium, which is really solid for him. Like you got points for Percat, and he had a really solid weekend in a car that doesn't always deserve to be in the top 10, but on a track where we've seen the Commodore struggle to get a pair of top 10s and to be the leading Commodore home on the Sunday, it was a really solid effort from there. But for me, I've gone Mostert for the 1 point. Purely, he's got a couple of podiums, second on Saturday, third on Sunday. Showed really good consistency across the weekend. For 2 points, I've gone for Davison. I know he had a tough time out on Saturday, but that Sunday race I thought was just brilliant. He was able to get the jump on McLaughlin at the start, able to hold him off. They used a little bit of clever strategy to get him in front after the first round of stops, and then if it wasn't for that airbox fire, he could have taken home the victory, which would have been huge for him. But away second, it's it's back-to-back podiums in different in weekends. Like we had the podium in Ipswich now, so they're definitely making a lot of improvements over the past few weeks, and we've seen that probably since about Winton that they've steadily started to improve and had a chance of a podium in Darwin. Didn't happen, and then he's had a couple of podiums of late. So yeah, certainly I think he deserves the 2 points just for that race back on Sunday, and then 3 points goes to McLaughlin just because he got the 2 wins. He got only the 1 pole position across the weekend, but he was just so fast. And then when he didn't think he could extract any more time out of the Mustang, he does. And he still manages to find another couple of tenths. And I think I only seen him off the track once, and that was in at the end of, I think it was Q2. I think he went wide early in Q2 there. It was the only time we've seen him off the track for the entire weekend.
So, a pretty interesting weekend all round at the Bend. Moving on from our weekend review, unless you have any more points to bring up.
Well, the only other one I thought was a touch strange was that they put pole position on the inside line. And I thought that was a bit, because then both of whoever put it on pole dropped back at the start. So I thought that was quite strange. So I wonder if that'll be something they bring up for next year. And it'll actually be having the Enduro next year, which we'll touch on shortly too. But that'll be interesting if they put pole position back on the racing line, because he just had the more grip to get the better launch. So the inside line doesn't necessarily give you the best opportunity. It's actually the racing lines that the best to be on.
Yeah, the more grip for sure, especially considering how dirty the Bend is.
Yes, it's such a long run down to turn 1 as well. So it's having the more grip is, I think, definitely bodes better than having the inside line.
So moving on to some interesting news, we're going to be having the 500 at the Bend next year, which will be pretty exciting, especially for those that live in the South Australian area. I'm hoping that I don't know whether it would be a great choice to use the longer circuit. I don't think they will. I think they'll probably use the same one, because the circuit they run currently is already pretty long. But it'll be an interesting toss up for them anyway. An interesting thing that they could maybe look into. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think they'll keep the same circuit. I think if they use the full circuit, I think they'll be just a bit too long, and if you're sitting up in the grandstand on the main straight, you're not going to see the car. Even in a 500k race, you're still not going to feel like you're seeing the cars enough. So
yeah, true.
Keeping it a little bit shorter, I think, works a little bit better. But I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a better circuit than Sandown.
You're only saying that because the the Fords were destroyed last time at Sandown.
Well, they have still certainly won their share of Sandown 500s over the years.
That's
so
true.
It's one of those things that goes year on year, and change a model, you get some, you might find a bit more speed or lose a bit of speed or whatever. But I think, I'd look forward to it there, just because I think Sandown, its time might have come and gone for hosting the 500. It's not the first time it's lost it either. I think we've seen it move to Queensland Raceway for the Queensland 500 on a couple of occasions, and then more recently Phillip Island hosted the 500k race for a couple of years there too. So it's not unheard of for Sandown to lose the 500k race, and they should still be holding a sprint race, which will still be good. I think a sprint race is actually probably more favourable to Sandown, because if you push, there's always a bit of risk that you can go off, and the fences aren't too far away there. We've seen some pretty massive accidents there over the years, so I think it'd be better to see a sprint race at Sandown and then leave an endurance race to somewhere like the Bend. I think if they do that, though, they got to do a few things to just improve the show for the fans. So I think a couple of extra grandstands probably wouldn't go astray. Like, it kind of looked weird having that tiny little grandstand on the inside of the main straight, the start-finish straight, and then just nothing behind it, like a massive green paddock.
It's like they forgot to build the rest of them or something.
Yeah, that's it. It's like it's like the rest is still coming later in the year or something. So it's a bit weird. Maybe they need to to slash the grass there and put a few
hills.
Or maybe a couple of spectator hills, but even just put like a couple of big show and shine type events in the middle there. Just all that off track stuff. Just have something in the middle there that you can give just make exciting for the fans, because it just looked weird when they had that view going down the main straight. You just had that tiny little grandstand, nothing behind it. It kind of looked weird. They've obviously got a lot of other infrastructure there. There's a hotel there. There's they had a little bit of a museum there.
There's a gym above this pool. A gym above the pit lane.
Oh yeah. So
which is weird.
Yeah. So there's plenty of stuff there. I think they're going to have to work on accommodation. No doubt they'll be expecting more people there next year. So you could definitely put campgrounds in there. Even make that infield like a bit of an RV park. Similar to what you see in the States. At the NASCAR events there, like a little RV park in the middle there where they can set up for the weekend and and watch the race. I reckon that would be a pretty cool way to go as well.
A few other rumours, not news technically, rumours surrounding the calendar for next year. Queensland Raceway and Phillip Island being dropped. Personally, I think it's probably, if they're going to drop any, I think they're probably the two best options, I guess. The only thing I would possibly think of is maybe dropping Winton instead of Queensland Raceway, but both are kind of like the country rounds for their areas. Although in saying that, Queensland Raceway isn't that country, it's only Ipswich, so it's not too far out of Brisbane, but I think a lot of country supporters would complain if Winton was dropped, so they've probably kept that in there just to not upset the country Victorian supporters.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right there. Well, Winton, it is one of the rural events that supercars go to. There aren't too many, and we used to have a couple back in the day, but now it's Queensland Raceway. It is only an hour or so out of Brisbane, but it's still a more rural part of part of southeast Queensland, and then Winton certainly covers that bill in Victoria, and you get a lot of southern New South Welshmen too that make the road trip down there because it might only be a couple of hours drive for them. So I probably would have actually tried to strike an agreement with the various organisers of those events, and if they're Queensland Raceway obviously has government funding as well. I probably would have looked to try and perhaps rotate them over the next couple of years, just so we could still see those tracks on there, and you get a bit more variety as well. Queensland Raceway and Winton had have alternated for a couple of years there, and then Phillip Island and somewhere else could have alternated for a couple of years. I think that would have worked quite nicely, like Phillip Island and perhaps Sandown, because certainly Victoria have the most events out of any state, as we've touched on a couple of times too. But the fact that they've gone for Queensland Raceway and Phillip Island, I think that's probably fair. Queensland Raceway, it's never been a fan favourite, even though it's always turned out some decent racing. It's always been a little bit boring to watch in some cases, but Phillip Island's kind of that one's strange because it has been a bit of a fan favourite. It rates fairly highly. It's one that the fans really enjoy sitting down and watching, but the fans don't turn out anymore like they used to. Like they're lucky if they're getting sort of 30,000 across the weekend, which is kind of low.
Not enough, really.
So to only have a few thousand spectators up on the hill opposite the pit lane isn't really enough to justify having a race there anymore. And the fact that the Australian Grand Prix is only on a handful of weeks before it probably halts a lot of potential fans on going down there because they've spent their money for the Grand Prix.
Yeah, that's true. Moving on to some actual news, which is not just rumours anymore. So James Courtney has confirmed that he's leaving Walkinshaw and Andretti United. But the rumourous part of that is that Mostert might be moving to Walkinshaw and Andretti United to replace Courtney. Be interesting to see the silly season, which should be starting soon enough. Well, it's already basically started with Courtney confirming this. Be interesting to see where Courtney goes, or whether he retires, or whether he moves to another team. I think he'll probably move to another team. He just hasn't been able to announce it yet, because I think if he had the opportunity, I think he would have announced it as he was leaving Walkinshaw and Andretti, saying my next journey is kind of with this next team kind of thing, so people have that kind of closure. But he's probably just leaving his options open. That's my opinion anyway, but a lot of people are leaning towards Mostert going to Walkinshaw and Andretti United.
Yeah, Mostert's he's the short price favourite, I think, to take Courtney's seat. It's been rumoured for quite a long time. Obviously, Mostert to DJR was one of the big rumours. I sort of still have a little bit of conspiracy theory that DJR might put a third car on, because they spoke to Ryan Story about that a little while ago, and they sort of pressed him on it, and he was sort of he said that no, we're not planning on running it, but it is something that we've kind of talked about, but we're certainly not planning it anytime soon. But I remember back when they asked me when they were going to move from the one car team to a two car team, and he said the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, in 2016 they had a second car, and that was Coulthard's seat. So they've got history in that, but moving from one car to two car is a lot easier than going from two car to three car. So
exactly.
It's a bit of a rickety bridge to think that might still be a possibility, but I still wouldn't completely close the book on that possibility. But I think, Mostert to WAU, I think, is definitely the short price favourite. I think Courtney, it's been rumoured for a little while now that Charlie Swerkolt at Team 18, where Irwin Racing, where Mark Winterbottom's at, that's been the rumoured destination for Courtney, that they would move to a two-car team as of next year, which I think would work. Probably work better for them, because even though they're getting all of that Triple Eight data, it's not the same as having a second car in the garage next year, and it feels a lot more live. Getting that, the drivers are able to talk to each other when they get back into the pits. It just works out much better. So I think that's where you'd probably end up. And especially when you consider that Charlie Swerkolt was at DJR in the year that Courtney won his championship with them too. So they've got that history there as well.
Who do you think will be replacing Mostert possibly then at who do you think will be replacing Mostert?
Well, there's a couple of rumours on that one too. They're saying that Jack Le Brocq would probably be favourite to take his seat because he's currently at Techno Watersports now and not having a good season at all. And he's been with Tickford in the past. Been a few years now since he was there, but he has had history with Tickford. I think it's always been a bit of it might have had a bit of a handshake agreement that when the seat opens up and we think it's time, then we'll get you back in. I'm still not going to put the possibility of Thomas Randall jumping in there. I actually thought that perhaps maybe even 23 Red Racing might jump to being a two-car team next year as well, and then put Randall into that car as well, which would kind of make Tickford potentially a 5-car team then, which would be unheard of in supercars.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, that's it. So I've given that. Yeah, technically 2 cars belong to another team, but it'd be. Yeah, it's weird how it depends which way you want to look at it. They're either a 4-car team or a 3-car team with like a side project.
Yeah.
But I think there are a couple of possibilities. But there's also been a bit of talk that's popped up lately that Reynolds, who is still tipped to re-sign with Erebus, has not done so yet. They might just be waiting to cross the T's, dot the I's type thing. It might just be hopefully trying to squeeze out a little bit more cash. Who knows? But surprisingly, he hasn't. There's been a couple of rumours that he might be looking at Tickford, and Tickford might be looking at him. Like he was kind of unceremoniously dumped from the team at the end of 2015, despite finishing third in the championship that year. And then he had his move to Erebus, and he's been really strong since then. He's been a good driver ever since he entered the field, really. But there's been a few rumours lately that Tickford could still be on the horizon for him, so that would be a very interesting one if he went back there. But I would say that's probably unlikely. But I guess the evidence to that is where he was always pretty quick to give the Mustang a hard time about having an advantage. He hasn't really spoken too much about that lately.
Yeah.
It hasn't really come up as much, and so it's a little bit surprising. But he might be the right fit. And if you're going to lose a driver like Mostert, you want to gain a driver like Reynolds because they're probably just as fast as each other. Obviously, they're both really good personalities. They're always quick with a joke and having a laugh, and they don't take it too seriously, which you need those characters, and having them in your team can only be a good thing for the sponsors as well.
So moving on finally to some exciting news for those that are fans of cars crashing into each other and flying through the air. The Stadium Super Trucks are going to be coming back for Adelaide next year and possibly some other rounds. Obviously they were banned controversially by CAMS just before the Gold Coast round last year. Probably the most loved support category that I've ever seen support supercars. Lots of people suggesting that we should make them jump over the super utes, but I don't think that will be approved by CAMS. I think they're just lucky to be allowed back into the country, really.
Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to seeing them. They were really good fun to watch. They were short races, only 5 or 6 laps at certain circuits, but getting over those jumps, it was always hard to see exactly how far and how high they were jumping on some of the camera angles because it would be sort of above the cars. But then when they were shot along, one of the just cameramen along pitch straight, getting it, they're getting some serious height and they're jumping a good 20, 30 meters along the road. So it's extremely entertaining. They're loud, they're fast, they drift. You get they'll cock a wheel in the air as they're going around the corner. There's so many things to like about that category, and we've needed them back in there. So it's I'm looking forward to seeing that.
It's literally like the embodiment of what every person wants to see at racing.
Yeah, well, and like you touched on, like versus our own super utes, which have not set the world on fire, and I was actually really looking forward to seeing them coming into last year's championship, but they just ended up, being a real letdown. They weren't as exciting as we thought that they were going to be. But these stadium super trucks, like, they're loud, they're noisy, they jump. Like it's every kid's fantasy to see those cars. Even big kids like myself, that's what you want to see in racing. It's because it's different. These cars that are normally you'd expect to see, jumping over sand dunes and all that sort of stuff, but they're going around, the Adelaide street circuit, and still actually getting some pretty high speed.
Yeah, it's just to give you a bit of perspective. When I was in race control in Townsville, when they had those stadium super trucks, those trucks were jumping almost higher. Like their wheels would have been like level with my head. When I'm on the second story, they're jumping that high and they're just flying through the air. They actually had to they close the pedestrian bridges when they're doing those as well, because obviously they had that issue at Barbagallo, but before that in Townsville they had still were closing the pedestrian bridges because they just go flying.
Yeah, they're exciting to see, and I'm looking forward to having them back. It'll be interesting to see how many circuits we see them back at through the year. Usually it was the street circuits, it was and most of them as well.
So that just about wraps us up for tonight, unless you have any more points, Shane?
I was just going to touch briefly on, well, we mentioned it briefly before that we had Mostert as taken the lead over Fabian Coulthard in that everyone versus McLaughlin championship. I think it's it is good to see other drivers pressing DJR. I think it's exciting to see. I think, as we said, Coulthard needs to find a way to step it up. If he doesn't turn it around quickly, we might even see a couple of the other drivers in front of him before too long. And although they still have a very handsome lead in the team's championship, it's not out of the realms of possibility that they could find themselves under a bit of pressure there. And also, I thought, just quickly going back to the possibilities of racetracks, like the calendar coming out for next year. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Brisbane Airport Auto Mall. That's been,
I haven't. No.
It was a project that it was first announced down here probably the better part of a couple of years ago, and it's out of Brisbane Airport. And if anyone has been to Brisbane Airport before, it'll be adjacent the international terminal. And it'll be Australia's first ever auto mall, and it's basically you have all of the major manufacturers. So you'll have Ford, Holden, Toyota, Nissan, Mitsubishi. You'll have the high end stuff like Mercedes and BMW and Audi, and possibly Ferrari and Lamborghini and all those ones as well. They'll have dealerships all around, and then in the middle of that will be a racetrack.
That's so cool.
So it's a 2.3 kilometre racetrack that's been designed by Mark Skaife. Looking at the artist's impression, it'll have around about 17 to 18 corners, depending on the exact configuration, because there'll be a couple of shortcuts between corners that they can skip out. I'm looking forward to it because I can see me going out there every few weeks.
Every weekend?
To pretend, I might go buy this Mercedes this weekend and pretend I'm going to do that and thrash that around the track, and then pretend to go buy a Mustang the week after, and then pretend to buy something else the week after that. So
I've got to come to Brisbane when that's done.
Yeah, but it was kind of surprising when I seen that. Okay, it'll be a really awesome project, and if you want to look into it more, just jump on YouTube and just type in Brisbane Auto Mall or Brisbane Airport Auto Mall. There's plenty on there, but when you look at the circuit, it wouldn't be too hard to actually turn it into the type of circuit that they're going to be using it for here, which is basically just a test drive circuit. It has a simulated top speed of 240 kilometres an hour, so it's still a fairly quick circuit. I don't know what car they've used to simulate that, whether it's a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or something like that. I don't know, but you'd think if they're using a supercar to simulate those sorts of speeds, then a V8 supercar could also probably achieve similar speeds. So, which is why I thought that perhaps maybe it could be something that they might look into, that once they decide to extend the calendar back out to where it is now, But they might consider that circuit, which would be a lot closer to Brisbane City, because Brisbane's never hosted supercars around. It's always been out of Ipswich, which is a different city. And if you ask anyone from Ipswich if they're part of Brisbane, they'll quickly tell you that no, they are not. So for that reason, Brisbane would actually finally get a supercars round, which it has never actually hosted, and is the only capital city, or apart from Hobart, that has not hosted a VF supercar race. So
wow,
I think I think that would be something that they could look at. 2.3 kilometre circuit, it would be on the shorter side of that, but when you see the circuit, it looks like it would still be challenging enough, still have some overtaking opportunities. Obviously, you'd have all those manufacturers around, so it'll be a huge PR weekend for anyone involved there. Just got to put some grandstands in. There's hotels around there at the airport. You're obviously right next door to the airport, so flying into the venue would be the easiest out of any circuit we go to Australia, because once you land, you're pretty much at the circuit. So I think once it's built, it would be not out of the realms of possibility that they could look at holding a supercars event there. But because it does even have a bit of a pit lane already there, I think that's where they'd obviously be leaving all the cars that are getting ready to do test drives with various customers and that. So it wouldn't be too hard to convert that into an actual working pit lane for race cars. So it'd be interesting to see.
That sounds awesome. I'm definitely going to visit Brisbane once that's built. But that wraps us up for today. Next week we'll be doing a preview of Pukekohe at the ITM Auckland Super Sprint. So that should be a pretty interesting round. Thank you very much for joining me, Shane.
No worries, mate. We'll talk to you soon.
And thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time.